Hi, welcome to Write More Light. My name is Sarah from the Midwest Writing Center, and I am excited today to talk with four brand new contributors to the, not brand new contributors, but a fresh batch of contributors to the These Interesting Times anthology, the forthcoming anthology of 2020 from MWC Press. We're gonna talk about writing. We're gonna talk about 2020. And ordinarily, we would end with what's up at the Midwest Writing Center and then follow that with a free write. We're going to skip those two things today so that we can give all our attention to the book. So thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to introduce you and then ask you all the exact same question to start. And so everyone knows, generally speaking, I think the order is going to be Frank, Rue, Mike, Melissa. I don't care if we popcorn style. I just wanted to warn you that's the order I'm going to be asking this first question in. So, Frank, do you consider yourself a writer?
I guess I do. Every time I sit down to do it, it's starting over. I don't know that I've learned a whole lot of things, but by repetition, yeah, here I am, a writer.
And then a follow-up to that. I love that, by the way. I think that's probably true of me. I feel like a novice every time I sit down, but I do keep sitting down. So the essay you are being published, I'm so sorry, words are just escaping me today. The essay that we're publishing of yours, is that typical of the sort of thing you usually write?
It's actually longer than I usually, as short as our contributions were. I was a columnist for the Rock Island Arts for a number of years, and I got used to working to a very specific limit, and with short stories and things like that. This is the first time in a long time that we really didn't have a restriction, and I could use as many words as were necessary, and then cut out those that weren't. So it was a bit of a challenge for me.
I'm a little surprised by that. Thank you for sharing. Rue, do you consider yourself a writer? And then, of course, is this, I guess it's an epistolary. Is this piece typical of what you write?
So I do consider myself a writer, have been as long as I knew how to write. I feel I have more credential to say it now, being published in a piece, but as far as typical, I would say historically, no, it was a lot of fantasy and fiction, but after this piece, I do a lot more personal and memoir and that kind of thing. So it's been a great transition.
Good answer. That was like you had a teleprompter. Same set of questions for you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Mike Bayles. I'm trying to remember the questions here. I write poetry, fiction, mixed genre pieces. My poetry book that came out a year ago is a collection of poetry where I flagged. Now I remember the question, do I consider myself a writer? I consider myself a writer, then other things second, including a wannabe social worker a long time ago, a guy who worked in a box factory, a guy who was a flagger for 4 seasons, and the traveling was good about my writing. Is over drinks typical of what I write? It always changes. It's part of my evolution in poetry, where maybe I'm doing a bit more twists and turns than I used to.
Yeah, I feel like I don't know, relatively familiar with your work. And I would probably have said like short answer yes, long answer no, if I were to answer for you, right? Like you do write poetry, you do write short poetry. But of course, this is a reflection of a moment in time. So yeah, let me just talk about you for a little while. Thank you, Mike. And Melissa, same questions. Do you consider yourself a writer? And is this poem that you have in the anthology typical of what you write?
Yeah, I definitely consider myself a writer, 100%. I think that it, who's drawn to it. Like I just really believe that if you write as a writer, and I think the style usually are more visceral and maybe more abstract, whereas the piece in the anthology is a call to action, which I think is really reflective on how the past couple years have been for me, where I guess, and just the idea of wanting to prompt something like a call to action that I wanted to share instead of just, this is how I feel, it was a problem, this is how to fix it. But I really enjoyed writing in that style, and I've definitely been doing it a little more in the past couple of years.
Thank you. So the reason I ask this question is, a lot of people don't consider themselves writers, and I'm really thrilled that all of you do, because like Melissa said, if you write, it's hard to say that you are not a writer, particularly if you do it frequently. But that's an answer that people often, or a question that people often put a lot of weight on, like defining capital W writer. So I think it's a fun one to ask. Then another question for everyone, and I'll repeat it as we go around. For your pieces, did you actually, each of you just has one. So for your piece, did you write it for the anthology prompt? Was it a work in progress? Were you writing it already and then you submitted it? How'd you decide to submit? Frank, if you're comfortable with it, you can go first again.
This piece was written as a submission for the anthology. That nutso of a year, and this is probably something that you'll want to get involved in more. I was not as productive as I thought I was going to be. So this came along at a wonderful time. Enough time for the previous year had gone by that I was able to, in some way, reflect and to try to get thoughts together. But no, it was a wonderful prompt for me to put that together.
I'm kind of surprised to hear that. It felt like, you call it a pan diary, and it feels a bit like a diary. So I just pulled it up because I did review your pieces yesterday, everyone who's here right now. But having read the whole book a couple of times, I'm still really concerned that I might be confusing you with other people. Yeah, that was a fun piece. I'm excited to ask more questions about it. So that was a surprise. It felt like it was probably already a work in progress. So I'm excited to hear that. What was the process of writing specific to submission like then, as opposed to sitting down and writing for any other reason?
What I realized, and I hope I was right, was that this was a wide open opportunity. There was no definite form was prescribed for us, and that is often difficult for me. I work well within limits. As I said earlier, when I know I'm working with a 600-word limit, I know how to go. I know where to go. I know when to start. And so what I did was I just started, and I didn't know where it was going. And so the idea of putting it into diary form, in a chronological sort of form, actually came late in the game. And I've been struggling a lot. And once I saw that way of doing it looked right, then things went a lot more smoothly after that.
Like I said, I've got, this is kind of hard for me. Like, as each of you answer, I want to dig into your pieces. So it's a little bit hard for me to bite my tongue on my questions. But this is very surprising for me in particular. Or for you in particular, I guess. I'm excited. I'm so excited about it. Rue, did you already have this written or pieces of it written, or did you write for submission? And how did you decide to submit?
I decided to submit because somebody encouraged me to, and it was a lot of in the moment feelings. And it's really interesting that Frank says once he got his diary format down. That's kind of how I felt. Once I got the letter format down, it all just flowed out. And it was a letter to my mom about how she's not around to be here. And it was just very cathartic and it meant a lot to me. So
yeah, so if you've ever heard me talk about writing before, you know that I really love the epistolary style, which generally speaking is the diary or the letter. So those are sweet spots for me. So of course they both appeal to me in that special spot. So then they're also both, I'm gonna get back to this in a minute. I'm just very excited. They're both kind of timeline pieces, which is really common with an assignment like this, right? When we're asking you to look at a piece of time. So what Rue then was the process like writing specific to submission, as opposed to, you know, just writing?
yeah, I think there was only 2 drafts. I didn't have to go through and mess with much. It was more like, this is everything I want to tell her. And if it's not right for the submission, then I'm okay with it, because I don't want to change how I express to her just to get into a book. So
That's beautiful. That keeps it deeply personal. Thank you. And Mike, I'm assuming you have a different answer from the others, but was this piece already written, or did you write it for submission? And how did you decide to submit it?
They're 2 things I wrote related to the pandemic. One for a contest that took second, I think. And I wrote this specifically for the contest, but it's a good prompt maybe for me to write something that was kind of on my mind, and maybe, like I'd say, the issue of how processing the year is difficult. Prompts, I think, sometimes lead me to say things that I was kind of meaning to say anyway.
That
I appreciate.
That always kind of makes me angry if I'm writing into a prompt and then I'm like, oh, I was just pent up. Like, I just needed to write this thing. But that's cool. I'm glad that we got it, since that contest didn't. That's great. Thank you. How'd you decide to submit?
I like to be involved in projects of the Midwest Writing Center. I think I submit to just about anything that the Midwest Writing Center brings my way. It's always nice. I've submitted to the Midwest Writing Center, been part of it ever since the Out Loud open mic readings. And we had a thing which was very special in person. I hosted some of them, so did Sal Marie G and other people. We ended up having an anthology taken from poems, and it was called the Out Loud Anthology. And that was a very personal thing to me, especially when I was hosting it. I hosted a launch party for 2, and I said, this is us. You know, it became a very big personal thing, especially with that.
I love to hear that. That was before my time, but I'm familiar with the anthology. I didn't know the history of it, so thank you. Melissa, I don't know if you caught the question. It was, well, actually, I know your answer, but you're gonna have to answer anyway. Did you write this piece for the anthology prompt, or was it already written?
I wrote it for the anthology prompt, which I'm usually not a big prompt person, but when I heard about the anthology, I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I was curious about what kind of writing would come out of trying to write about something that I've been doing everything I can to avoid thinking about too much. Because at the time that the submission period for this was happening, I was working a job that I'm no longer at, that I was making a little bit more money, and I had enough, you know, for like me, bills, and like leave a little safety net. And I had been doing a lot of research into ways to get money, like donations, directly to people as fast as possible. So looking into things that aren't just a big charity donation where it takes time to process, but instant relief, things that can help right now. And I think a lot of that was in the back of my mind when I was writing, thinking about like calls to action, something we can do right now. Like everything felt like a problem. It felt like everything was just falling apart and a lot of people really needed help. And I was seeing just constant like donation fundraisers and constant just people talking about how they need help, they need money. And I really think a lot of that was just in the back of my mind when I was writing. The piece is called In the Age of Internet Activism, and it centers on just like what are things you can do to help right now. And when I was writing that, it felt very encompassing of the time because a lot of people were struggling without an outlet to ask for help besides the internet because we were all quarantined. You couldn't have big in-person fundraisers or anything like that. And so I think it's pretty emblematic of the time. And also it was what I'd been focusing on like in my personal life at the time, trying to find solutions. So yeah, it was for the prompt.
I actually didn't expect that answer. That was beautiful. Thank you. I'll go to Rue. I'm going to start in on some of the people-specific questions, and then we'll go back out to big picture. Everyone, please answer questions. So we have several. I've already said this. We have several timeline pieces, but yours sort of flips that form on its head with making it a direct address. Or like a pro-con list of bereavement, and which is clever. So how did you choose this form? How did this sort of weighing of events come to be? And what did you? Well, I'll ask a follow-up question after you answer.
The juxtaposition was really when my mom was alive. I didn't realize she was going through mental health issues, and she started to change in the dementia way some of us are familiar with, where they're not the person that you remember them being. And so we'd get in fights because I didn't realize she just wasn't all there anymore, for lack of a better term. And so when I thought about going through the pandemic and some of these things, and how I would have to help not only my mother, but the person that she had become, it really weighed on me. Like, I feel guilty that I feel relieved. And I really need to express to her that my relief is not that I don't miss you, it's that I don't think I could have been the best daughter that you deserved in those moments. So that was my back and forth in my little soul.
Just a small soul. Yeah, so with the form in particular in mind, the letter, right? The way that it feels like you're weighing tragedies against each other or their relationship with one another. It was a surprise to me to hear that you were writing it to the prompt, because those feel like just things that beg to be put on paper. So did you write anything else in this vein or was it like you were maybe specifically not writing? How did that work for you?
This piece is the only one that came out of it. I just threw my whole emotional turmoil into it, if you will, and I've branched off into other things that kind of give more of a light to who my mom used to be and how we used to interact. So it's been cathartic that I think I got at all my guilt and my feelings that I wasn't good enough, and now I can move on to other things. So
Melissa, I'm going to do you next, because you basically already answered the question. So so I'm ready to finish out the rest of the question. Your piece, In the Age of Internet Activism, is a strong call to action, maybe a call on conscience. What, I suppose it could be, every single thing, every single day of 2020, but what was there any catalyst, particularly motivating event? Was it something you were just sitting with a lot? Tell me what inspired this piece.
Yeah, so I'm just like a close little friends who are in school, a lot of friends who like little spark is when I got my new job, a little left over after every paycheck. Hired right out of college. A lot of places just straight out of people who relied on college for like a
I'm not sure if you can hear me, Melissa, but you're cutting out, so I'm gonna return
place
to
to live and a place that they can get food reliable.
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm gonna return to you and hopefully we can hear your answer better a little later. Next, I've got Mike. Your piece is called Over Drinks. It's a poem, and it's about going out to the bar for what seems like a really chill night. But post-quarantine, in the middle of chaos, right? There's so much going on in time in the context of this piece. So I want to know, I guess, without like giving away the entire piece, there's some documentary aspects, right? Some domestic, where you're looking at the events going on around you in this bar, or you being the narrator, of course. And then some like, yeah, documenting of the daily life in this interesting time. So I'm interested in hearing if this is a strictly documentary piece, which it does not. It doesn't seem like this is like properly based on one day in one place, right? Because you talk about COVID, you talk about Black Lives Matter, you talk about, you know, returning to public, you talk about Alex Trebek, you talk about social distance. Is this more of a documentary piece, or maybe a reflection of your own personal position in time, or an act of self-care and conscience? Where do you place this piece in that grander scheme, you personally?
First of all, it's a list poem. Sometimes that's how I have to write poems, where I let one line speak to me and it brings the others. It's not a strict documentary poem, except those things actually do happen. And I do actually know bars, and sometimes we're thinking about things when a football game's playing, which I think is its own kind of violence. Those things just kind of stuck together. It's readers should kind of interpret itself, but the pandemic experience, a constant diet of it was on the news. I'd eventually have to turn it off. I'm a public radio junkie. Eventually I'd have to turn it off. It's overwhelming, and there are other things that go on when the COVID's going on. I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned from that year, which would be something for me to yet write. I think the year 2020 is supposed to be a big message, but I think the poem's kind of about us processing everything that went on during 2020.
Thank you. I think that's what I was trying to say, and just wasn't being very eloquent. There's and I encourage everyone out there to of course read the whole book, but Mike's piece is a really solid like snapshot of a moment, even though that moment is a grander amount of time. And I'm glad that he described it rather than me continuing to try. So next up, Frank, we've got your piece is called Cancel Culture, a Pan Diary. And the editor, Misty, and I had a laugh. So in the submission process, knowing I would be the proofreader, I tried to keep some distance. But we had a little laugh about like having a little nervousness after reading the title. And I think that, I mean, it's the most excellent piece. I, granted, clearly don't have anything negative to say about any of you, but you managed to take, I don't know, cultural cultural commentary and moments, like significant flashbulb moments, and play with the timeline format, which I've talked about already. You've got wordplay. You talk about gossip in small towns and like the terrible decisions we have to make to survive, and you do it with humor. I gotta say, your use of exclamation points and question marks just made it for me. That was a chef's kiss. I'm just not great at it. So how did you manage that? How did you manage to tell the story with such levity? There's so much weight in what you're saying, and you managed to not make me cry but make me laugh. You talk about all these things you're looking forward to that have been canceled, and all of these moments where you have to consider like the consequences of actions and of language, but you do it and it's funny. Tell me how that works.
I'd like to know how that works. How it works for me is very slowly in editing. While this is, yes, in a diary, sort of year-long, month-by-month presentation, it's not really how I wrote it. I wrote it more from the top down, I would say, rather than from left to right. The further I got with it, the more that I felt that I had to say. And I knew I couldn't fit everything. You can't fit everything into everything that you write. But when you got something to say, you got to say it. I think that if I were to write this again, I think it would be more angry and less funny than it was, because it really was a process of.
I have to confess, I think anger is pretty funny too. Sorry, keep going.
No, I was learning as I was going. I didn't know what the end was going to be. And the end was, I'm upset about the way we've handled this last year. But I had to get there. And so it really, editing for me is a lot of back and forth. And I think the nature of it is you change something at the beginning that may require changing something later on. And of course, I want to be honest. Rue said something very important about that earlier, that she wasn't going to change the truth to get it in a book. What's the point of changing the truth to get it in a book? That would seem pretty. So that's a good point of view, one that I'll remember. But the truth isn't always interesting. At least I find that of myself. It just isn't the case, and it can take a little massaging to make it more universal or accessible.
I'm also really glad both that Rue said that and that you reiterated, because that's something that I'm gonna need to take home with myself too. I am a writer as well. And I often, after you get so many rejections or whatever, you're like, well, clearly I need to change the piece. But like, if you're married to the piece, if you thought it was good and done, like maybe trust yourself. You're the expert. To that end, I think that, well, a follow-up question I have will actually directly respond to what you said about if you rewrote the piece, and if it were angry. Cool. So I'm going to go back to Melissa in hopes that I can hear your answer. I'm going to just restate the question, because then we all know what we're talking about. Your piece is called "In the Age of Internet Activism," and it acts as a strong call to action or a call on conscience. So what was there any inspiring event or moment in time where this all came together for you, and please tell me how that went.
Yeah, sort of. So I'm not sure how much you could hear the first time. Sorry about that. Hopefully it's better. I'm connected to Target's Wi-Fi. Ooh, so hopefully that's working.
So far so good. Yes, much better.
Okay, good. Yeah, so when I was thinking about, I'll start at the beginning. So when I was having that little bit of extra money that I could do something with, I had the idea to even just start that train of thought just by seeing a lot of people who were, my age, graduated college with me. We were like 1-2 years out. Then a lot of my friends who were still like their senior year of college or something, just posting on Facebook, Instagram about not being able to be hired, people I knew who relied on college for a safe space to live in a place that they can reliably get food and things like that. And so with COVID, there was so much uncertainty in stable living situations and just the ability to exist safely. And that is definitely what kind of sparked that train of thought for me, was just seeing it in my everyday life on all of my like news feeds and stuff. Because when we were trapped inside, there wasn't too much to do besides watch movies and check social media, which I was doing probably an unhealthy amount. And that definitely got me started onto thinking about like, well, what can I do? I have some resources now. What can I do with them? And then from there, looking into different like charities and things like that. But so many of those, there are a lot of issues in the charity world that I could do a whole other talk about. But a lot of them, even the good ones, have just that time between when they get money until when it becomes a resource for people, because there are so many hoops they have to jump through. And that started me on looking into more direct ways of giving. And that was almost entirely just internet fundraisers, GoFundMes, things like that. And so I do think that that was the initial spark for this piece. And then it kind of rabbit holed into the world of why is money so hard and why is it so hard to help someone? And so I think that the piece really centered on that original thought of just people deserve safety, people deserve help. And if you can help them, you should. Because I think that's just a central belief I hold, and that's where it came from for the piece, at least.
I want to add to that you, it's like a very, oh gosh, there's a word for it. Like low barrier ask that you give in your piece. You're saying, direct action isn't that hard, which I think is a point that we don't see made very often in calls to action, or in poetry for that matter. So that's a cool intersection. Thank you for that. I'm going to return to asking everybody questions now. And some of you have kind of spoken to this already, but no, actually just Mike. But I'm going to ask it anyway. Last week after the other panel, I did a short segment on documentary writing, which is really just writing to document the world around us in whatever way. And I would say that each of these pieces and each of the pieces in the anthology as a whole constitute as documentary writing. So I'm wondering if any of you, if all of you have thoughts on the pros and cons of documentary writing, and maybe why you yourself do it.
Is this me?
Yeah, anybody can go, but I have been starting with you, so maybe I should just keep to that rhythm.
Well, if we look at documentary writing, not so much in the film aspect, but in the
if you try to research it because you want to teach on it, that's a poor phrase to use, because you will just get information on how to make movies.
Right. Yeah, I can see that. I would hesitate to pontificate on this subject. I'd be better off listening, I think, a little bit.
I can accept that. Mike, what are your thoughts?
I'd hope that I don't document facts, even though I have to research stuff for, like, if I'm writing news items for a thing called Rattlecast, which I participate in. I'd hope that I more document experience. It's maybe I capture how maybe other people kind of feel about the experience the way I do. Maybe it's all kind of my feelings about the experience. And I think if we all do this and like read each other, I think we develop a sense of understanding. I think we develop a sense of empathy, which in a grand scheme, maybe it'd make the world a nicer, more peaceful place. I think we're all here kind of to share with each other.
I was muted. Absolutely. And I think, this book is sort of by design a time capsule. And so even if our takes are super common and everyone has them more or less, or alternatively, if our takes are super unique, these all hold a place in this book, which is pretty exciting. Rue, I'll repeat the question. It was, what do you think of some maybe pros and cons of documentary writing? Why do you do it? No, I was about to ask a question that I will ask later.
You can ask now, as I don't feel qualified to speak to the documentary question. Sorry.
All right. Just to be clear, you all do it, and you are all clearly wonderful at it. Melissa, do you have thoughts on this question?
Yes. I think that documentary writing can be such a beautiful thing. I think that it can do a lot to take something that may seem like a common experience or may seem like something, oh, I hear about that all the time. So many people go through that, therefore it's not a big deal, and cross that boundary from everyone goes through it, it's not a big deal, into, well, what does it mean? What does it impact? How does it change a person's life? Because I think it's so hard for a lot of people to have like empathy that crosses into understanding and isn't just, oh, that sucks, I feel bad for you, and is like, I know what that means, and therefore I know what, like, if not what it feels like, what you might need right now, and things like that, and how that can shape a person. So I think that it can be just a really, really beautiful tool of relation and understanding. There are some cons, though. I know I read about this a little bit in when I was still in school, about what type of texts are chosen to be representative of a time. And we talked about it largely with like Shakespeare being the one we read, and that's not documentary writing, that's creative writing, but still just what texts that talk about life at a time survive. And they're very much so like picked and choose to tell a certain narrative. And so when it comes to documentary writing, it is kind of a responsibility when you're bridging from personal to an experience that's kind of more, I guess, group centered or cultural, to know that you can't say everyone is doing this and just say everyone I know is doing this and things like that. So I think that when you're doing documentary writing, it's just such a gorgeous tool for like creating connections and understanding each other. But you also have to do it with responsibility in your mind, to not be like, I don't know, overgeneralizing or like romanticizing things in a way that's saying this is truth for everyone and things like that. It's a complicated issue to talk about for sure, but mostly I think that it's just so beautiful to talk, like just to say, this is what's happening, this is how it influences people. So in the future, you can see like, oh, this is why you're the way you are, and things like that.
Oh, that's why you're this way.
Mhm.
And I mean, really anyone who's ever heard me speak for more than 4 seconds knows that I think that everybody should be writing everything all the time, which is probably not true, but it is how I feel. So that's why I wanted other takes on it, which really anyone can have a different opinion from me because mine's pretty extreme. So my next question, which is related, which is the one I almost asked Rue, I think we sort of generally accept that there's a cathartic or healing element to art. Writing is art, but I think that sometimes writing through difficult things can be difficult, can be sobering. What is your experience of that? We'll start with Frank, unless you turned your mic off because you don't want to.
No, that's just fine. Often for me, the difficulty in writing about something that I know may be cathartic or helpful is actually beginning. Sometimes I don't really want to know what I think. I prefer that it just flies around somewhere and I don't have to deal with it. Once the writing begins, so often, I won't call it a floodgate, but a trickle will begin. And that is valuable. Um, I have most of my life I've been a writer, composer of music in various styles. And one thing that I learned in that profession is that beginners want to try to pour everything into every work that they do, and everything gets cluttered. Then therefore nothing has any focus. And as a writer of prose or documentary, in this case, as we might be calling it, it is necessary on the one hand for me to open up that floodgates, but then shut it off. There's too much. I need to look around and find, so what is this of all these things that are going in my mind that are funny or painful? What is this really about? What is this that is of interest to somebody else? I edit a lot. And this piece could have gone on for 20,000 words or more if I hadn't just stopped and said, that's enough. Thanks.
I would read it if that happens. Just so you know, you've already got a fan. Thank you. I actually took a note while you were speaking. I think that you made a really, really beautiful point that I have forgotten because I wrote it on the back page of the next question. But you also said, I don't always want to know what I'm thinking. And that was really, really poignant for me anyway, because I mean, I don't know who said it, but there's a really famous quote about writing, which is, I write to find out what I'm thinking. And that's fair. A lot of the times when I feel like stopped up or like I have writer's block, it's because I'm not writing because I don't want to think about it. And I feel very grateful that you said that someone said that. So thank you. Same question then to Rue. Are you next in my cycle? Again, we generally think of writing or art as cathartic, but sometimes maybe it's not. How do you feel about the healing power or difficulty of writing?
So I'm quite the opposite. If I have writer's block, it's because I have no feelings and I'm really happy. If I'm spewing something on a page, it's because I'm upset or angry. So the cathartic is there, and it's really my driving force, which I think really speaks to what Frank said about getting everything out there and it kind of being chaotic. Like, my piece is very chaotic. There's random tidbits everywhere and it's a mess, but I'm a mess, so it's very reflective.
That's not something I expected to hear. Thank you. Mike, same question for you.
A lot of learning on this subject came when I wrote a book called Breakfast at the Good Hope Home, which is a story of a son visiting his Alzheimer's dad in the nursing home. Actually, it's a fictionalized version of me visiting my dad when he had Alzheimer's. There's an editor in Wisconsin who published me a lot, who kept having me buying copies of the book, and I'd be sending it to families touched by Alzheimer's. And I wrote it to write a good piece. Of course, I wrote it to kind of get these feelings out, but I ended up writing a book that helped a lot of people. I learned some things that it's a rough read, which kind of makes it a very limited niche. It's not a happy experience, but it helped people. The one side of being cathartic in that is if you're going through a rough experience and reliving it, it doesn't always feel good. I felt great writing it, getting it out. I got depressed going through stages of revising it because I was going through the experience again. And I learned that working things out doesn't always feel good, but you have to do it. Grief changes when you stop being, there's always a little sadness, but grief kind of eases away when you stop feeling sad about losing the person that you're glad that you knew them, when you find that there's a way they kind of live inside of you.
Yeah, shoot, you said something I wanted to respond to and I should have written it down. I think you were getting close to a point that I think that we only think about in terms of being readers, which is that, you know, sometimes when you read or experience art that conveys us an experience similar to your own, that can be really helpful, where going through your own work that especially you've seen 14 times and you're editing it and it's a painful experience to begin with, can be really difficult. The other side of it, the consuming of that art, can be similarly cathartic. Thank you. Melissa, you wrote in the chat, I hope it's okay. Yeah, it is public. You wrote same when Frank was talking about writing. Do you want to elaborate on that? I can ask the question again.
Yeah, what he was saying really, I think, resonated with me, but I feel like writing for me personally is nothing but cathartic. I sob frequently and often while writing, even if it's not sad. It's just, I don't know, I feel like when I write, it's just kind of coming out of me, and here it is, and I can't do it in coffee shops because the barista will ask if I'm okay. And something, when Frank was talking, he mentioned something about learning about yourself through writing, I think, or like learning what you think, I think is what they said. And it just reminded me of, I was in like high school still, and I was writing poems about a friend, just like a girl I knew, and I just like found myself writing poems about her a lot. And then one day I was like, I think these are love poems, and that's kind of how I like came out. Like, it was just something that I learned from my writing about myself. That's what it made me think of, and it made me laugh over here, because I was like, yeah, I've never thought about writing as a tool to learn about what you think and your inner processes. But if you're able to just kind of let it come out, and then you can examine it and say, oh no, is this a fact? Because I think this is how I feel. And I just thought that was really cool, because I've never thought about that. And I think it's really, really true for me as well. So I thought that was neat.
You mentioned crying, which I'm really happy you did, because there is a physical element to catharsis, and writing is a physical act. Generally speaking, most of us don't write by dictation. I am not going to say that no one does. Certainly people do. A lot of us use like the voice to text notes app. But it is a physical process, and certainly part of that can be cathartic too. I without fail, when I'm writing, I have goosebumps, which sucks because I hate being cold. And it is like I feel cold, which doesn't matter time of day or season of the year. I get goosebumps every time, and it's not like a magical goosebump thing. It's like I'm suddenly cold. But that too is a physical response. And I lost it. I have more to say, but I'm very grateful for all of your answers to that question. I think that's a really hard one. I think it's a hard one because a lot of the time, I remembered it. I was going to respond to Mike saying sometimes it hurts, but I think that the difference is, you know, being in pain from an injury versus being sore from a workout, right? Maybe a poor analogy. I don't work out, but all the same, I think that's worth considering how maybe something that is healing doesn't necessarily mean it's fun. Let's move on to something a little less serious. I have two questions left. And I can't decide if I can fit them. We're going to try and fit them both. What do you think, this is for each of you, what do you think this anthology would look like if we waited till, say, 2025 to take submissions? Alternatively, if we do a sequel in 2025. Go ahead, Frank.
Those are both interesting hypotheses, how things would look different. I know that in my case, I'd be a little angrier and less funny. On the other hand, that might not be so interesting. So there's certainly is a trade-off there. The matter of perspective, I write often about my childhood 60 years ago, I have a much better perspective on it now than I did when I was 15 or when I was 25. It doesn't mean that my writing would necessarily be better, but what I had to work with would be better, because I don't know, because I hesitate to say because I've grown up. It's just because I've had more experiences to compare things to. So 5 years later, if we're still here, it's hard to say how that would look. So I'm glad the opportunity came when it did. Thanks.
Thank you. Rue, same question.
I think the timing was perfect. When the submission request went out, it was all fresh and all right there. So I think if it had been any later, I would have submitted something completely different, because I wouldn't have still been in the headspace that I was in. And I love the idea of a sequel. I love the idea of bringing the writers back to tell, a different perspective or a different story, but also like the kids who were, too young to write in this anthology and what their experience was, because I'd love to know how they're doing in all this, because I'll never know the experience of going to school, not going to school, and all of those awful things.
Yeah. My the way that this came to me was I was thinking about the voices that are not represented in this anthology, and my assumption, and I could be wrong, but I don't know, because I don't have them to reference, is that the people who are really going through really difficult things, and we asked for we opened submissions in, I think, November, December, which was like not a calm time to exist, and then closed them, I think, at the end of January. So everything is very fresh. We have a very particular presentness that may lack the perspective of distance, but may also keep people who are currently experiencing things from being able to process them into words. So that's something that interests me about the people who are missing. So same question to you, Mike. If we had waited till 2025, or if we did a sequel in 2030, how do you think that would be different?
I might find some irritation that maybe we forgot the lessons that are to be learned by the pandemic. We tend to go through stuff and forget and do the same things over and over again. I'd be interested if maybe to see how trauma would live on. There are entire studies, entire fields about trauma, about how it's carried through generation. If something was in the distance, I'd be interested to see how this trauma lived on with people. My first thought when you said is maybe it'd be a little bit more political, where you got people really angry about global warming and the way the climate's falling apart. Then maybe you'd have people who'd be denying that it's existed. Maybe there'd be some kind of interesting pieces. It's hard to say they're deniers. I'm wondering if in the future there'd be maybe people who'd write who denied that this stuff even happened, the way people deny things. That I'd be angry about.
See, this all just intrigues me, because we don't know, but also what time does to us. You just don't know till time does it. Same question for you, Melissa. Unless perhaps we have lost you. The question is about if we had waited till 2025, or if we did a sequel in 2025, how it would be different.
Did you say me? Okay, I didn't hear that part. I think that if we did it in 2025, if you mean instead, I think that would have been really weird. I think that, I've read a lot of pieces from it, because I had the pleasure of looking through it really quick when I was in the office the other day, and I think so many of the works are so raw, and they feel just very real and alive, and not I think that if we did it in 2025, it would feel like a reflection instead of living through it. I feel like the pieces that they are coming now feel like we are living through it right now. Whereas if people were to write it and things like that in 2025, I think it would just feel like a reflection, and it would feel much more, this is what I learned, instead of this is what's happening. And there's not, I don't think there's too much of a difference between those, but there definitely is a difference between what that is. Because if you're waiting until, years later, you get kind of more, I'm out of it now. So you don't have that fear of the future in it. You don't have that, I could get it. I could get sick. So there's a lot of uncertainty while you're in it that has fear that comes through the writing, no matter what. Yeah. Am I?
No, you're great. You're great.
I just almost dropped my phone a little bit. But yeah, I think that a sequel, though, might be fun. I think that could be fun. I don't know if I think it'd be fun just because I like a good squeakquel, but I don't know. I think that'd be cool to see what people think about this time in history once they're, because it'll be the people who do get to live through it. It's the people who get to make it out are the people who would do a sequel. And I feel like that's a really interesting look at it too. So, you mentioned something about missing voices, because there's definitely people who are not in a place where they can be spending their time writing and editing and submitting work right now. But maybe in 5 years, they would have the time to sit and reflect on it. I don't know, a lot of feelings. Could be fun though.
Yeah. In addition to the missing voices, I also noticed people would allude to some big, huge life event in their pieces, but then didn't talk about that, which is what really, which is something that drives this question, right? If we're still processing, are we writing? So the final question that I'll ask, if y'all have anything to add, and forgive me if you've got to run, don't let me keep you. We are coming up on 2 very quickly. When we originally advertised our call for submissions, we used the word disaster, and I don't think any of you really wrote into that idea. Rue a little bit, but sort of in a I wouldn't say that your piece is hopeless, right? Your piece is like, everything sucks, but maybe that's okay. None of you really wrote into this idea of disaster, and we specifically said, it doesn't have to be a disaster, but that's what we were calling it, as we talked about it before we made the call. So I'm the person who said 2020 was a disaster. Let's talk about it. You all certainly talk about hardship and challenges, but these are also really hopeful pieces. I'll say for Frank and Rue in particular, you really delve into hard things, but neither of your pieces make me feel despairing when I finish them. So if you're willing to, all 4 of you, I would love to hear you talk about what gave you or gives you hope during these interesting times.
The times certainly are interesting, and I think the anthology is well named. I get very negative about the future, but I've been through a lot of disasters, and a lot of disasters, we're never glad to see them, except in the rear view mirror, when we can get past them. I do have hope that some form of social unity is possible. This is the biggest disaster I think that has befallen us is each other. I do not think it is hopeless. I think it is an incredible challenge that is going to take, the best term that I can think of is patriotism, is getting over me, and you getting over you. I'm looking for an us. We don't seem to see an us nowadays. I don't know how to get there. It will be painful, but it's necessary. How this will happen, I don't know. I think yes, that year was a disaster. But so much depends on what our plans were. As I have mentioned in that piece, I initially saw it as a blessing. Oh, I've got 2 weeks of free time. We're only going to be shut down for 2 weeks. I can do whatever I want for 2 weeks. I was wrong about what the disaster was. It was a series of challenges, and they're not done. If that was a disaster, it's not over. But that doesn't mean that I need not have hope. It means I need to look in different directions. We'll see, and maybe in 5 years we'll do this again. I hope we'll have better news by then.
I do want to say there was a piece. This is totally true. It would be really weird if I lied about it. There was a moment in your piece when you talked about getting together with your Navy friends, and that not happening. That really gave me pause, because that's a level, I think, of camaraderie that a lot of people either don't appreciate or take for granted or haven't had. And I think there's a very visceral element to losing something like that, which you do by not going, by not having that get together. And of course, the word patriotism brought me to thinking that probably you have a better perspective on that as a veteran of, what thinking of that we and being together with the sailors and the musicians may do to the difference between the individual and the group. So I wanted to thank you for that moment. The question again is really what gives you hope during these interesting times? Rue, that question is for you now.
I spent a lot of time on it because I'm a very unhopeful person, a very pessimist person, not even realist, just, the world is ending, it's on fire. Time to have a glass of wine and watch TV. But I admit my shame, I'm on TikTok, and I feel that our younger generations are my hope. The way that they don't take their employers, you're expendable, just about cursed, rhetoric, the way that they stand up for each other and they accept each other, like it's something that gives me hope that even if in the future we're still politically divided, it's gonna shrink. So that's my hope.
So I'm seeing a sense or a theme of unity here. I'm here for it. Mike, same question for you. What gives you hope in at least interesting, but maybe difficult times?
The big thing that drives me is I made it this far. I've survived a lot, it's fatalistic, but not everyone lives to my age. I don't like to play the old guy part because I've got a lot of friends in their 20s and that I've survived. There are very discouraging things for me and very encouraging. As tack as it sounds, I get really angry if I'm sitting in a bar, like during karaoke, whatever, and Ultimate Fighting comes on because I thought we would have grown beyond it. I've always hoped that we were going to evolve to a better state, that with like Earth Day in the 70s and things, we would have evolved to where we were living very environmentally clean, but we're still going through a lot of issues. I get up each day kind of glad and looking forward to see what I'm going to write. I'm fully aware that there are things that could ultimately destroy us, environmental issues or whatever. Obviously, the thought of pandemics is a very scary thing. I don't think we'll totally get around it. We got both the really scary things and the things to really be glad about. And that's the way it's going to be. I'm going to be around as I'm around, and we'll carry on as long as we carry on. I worked at a job at a box factory that's really tough, and I figured, well, I've got to keep going. At that time, I was doing novels, right? I said, I got to keep going. I've got novels to write. So it's it can be very gloomy, but there are some pretty good things.
Thank you. Thank you. I love that. I'm grateful for that. Melissa, how did you at the very least keep the peace, not keep the peace, keep the peace with a sense of hope? How do you keep yourself with a sense of hope?
I'm hoping you can hear me okay, because I know you cut out a little bit when I was listening to you. Okay, good. That's a thumbs up. I don't know. I think I'm a pretty optimistic person. Generally, you might not get that from a lot of my writing, but I think that just being able to just know people, I think really helps. And Frank said patriotism, and I think a lot about community. I think in the same way that he was talking like a very collective want for the future. And I think that knowing people who are also full of love and want to help and want to give and are still through everything trying to find ways to do good has been a really big positive force in my life. What Rue was saying about like seeing kids who are doing really well and doing better got me thinking about like I've always understood like the kids are a future thing, but you know, like we were the kids once and we were supposed to be the future. And I want to do what I can to make sure that the new kids coming don't have to push up as much as people in the past did, as much as like my generation, the generation before me had to. I want to pave the way at least a little bit. And I think the idea that the work I'm doing can help like the next generation have an easier time making a bigger change really keeps me going. And just having programs and things, especially through the Midwest Writing Center, have been really, really cool and helping me a lot. Like just like, I don't know, mentally feel like there's still groups of people who are doing things for the younger generation. There are groups of people who are doing their best to make sure that they have a place to feel safe and to talk about their feelings and what they need and what they want, and finding tools to help them succeed, I think is a really, really big driving force, and just staying positive.
I love this. You all, I don't know if you noticed, you all mentioned something along the lines of community and togetherness, and you all mentioned goals, which I don't know, that's going to help me. I don't know. I didn't really ask for like personal reasons. It was just a theme I noticed throughout the book, and in particular with your pieces, that there was more hope than despair overall. No piece ended making you feel crappy, which is weird. Like, I don't know. I don't think of 2020 and think like hope. So that was worth noticing, and you all had answers that pinned on the future, which is awesome. So the final question, does anyone have anything you'd like to add? Anything you want to leave folks with today?
I would simply say how much I've enjoyed meeting you all and listening. I don't know if there are other people are watching or will watch this, but I hope that they will have the same reaction that I'm having, which is I really look forward to reading all your pieces.
You should. It's excellent. I have said this before, and maybe I shouldn't, but like I was really, really pleasantly surprised. I tried to keep some distance in the process, partially, because I was a part of the team, but partially because I submitted too, and I didn't want to color that at all. It's really good. Heavy, I had to read it in a sitting, and I don't really recommend that. Take your time with it. But it is really good. And thank you, Frank. I'm really happy I got to have this panel. It was my idea, but what an honor, what a pleasure. Sorry for interrupting the rest of you. Anything you want to leave folks with today?
Continuing the order, I would say thank you to Sarah and the Midwest Writing Center. Being that it will be my first published piece, it means so much to me. So thank you.
Well, thanks for letting us publish it. Mike?
First thing, I got to give a shout out to Misty Urban. She's amazing. Before I even knew her, I was sitting at a writers conference when the David Collins things. I missed most because I was out flagging and I couldn't get out of the work, and I caught like the last day. I was just amazed how she's bent towards someone in a novel class or fiction class, the way she was helping things. I love all the writers groups. I love the closeness we have, like in Writer's Studio. I go there to critique people and get better, and we're doing that, and we've grown very close. My big connections to life, as it were, are writers groups, karaoke, that kind of thing. Those are the kinds of the things I live for. I've got to say that the Midwest Writing Center stepped up and probably given me more chances to read in that, since I came out with that book of mine a year ago with Suitcase and Bag. I think Ryan's been pretty nice about that. So that's all. It's kind of nice. I think I was on my soapbox about us learning and the other things, but you know, these are kind of the final things that are striking me.
Thank you. Melissa, any final notes to leave our friends with? And there are a couple of people streaming with us currently. We don't have an exciting conversation in this one, but there are some people with us, and we will be obviously putting this on YouTube, keeping it up forever. So no pressure. Final thoughts.
Yeah, just thank you for watching. If you're watching wherever you are, share it with your friends. Midwest Writing Center does a lot of really, really cool programs. And if you were interested in watching this, maybe you're interested in other things. They do a lot of really cool stuff for writers, for readers, for kids, for adults, for everybody. So definitely, I don't know, thanks for being here. It was really cool getting to listen to everybody talk. I could like just talk with other writers all day, every day. And thank you, Sarah, for being such a good interviewer. I've definitely done some very awkward interviews, and this was not one of them, and I love that. So thank you. And yeah, that's about it.
Well, thank you all so much. Thanks, of course, to folks watching with us, but to you four in particular. I feel like you are all very, very insightful, and you gave great depth and great hope, if I may, to writing, to the anthology, and to what we are classifying as interesting times. To everyone in this Zoom and watching and interested, please go forth, write more light into your life.